Now, you've heard of the term VGA, but what exactly do you associate it with? Do you associate it with that blue cable? Or maybe you associate it with that iconic resolution? Well, what exactly is the term VGA? What kind of definition does it actually have? Today, we're going to walk down memory lane, we're going to be looking at some of the older standards, and we're going to be exploring what exactly they mean. You're watching another Random Wednesday episode on 0612 TV. Hello and welcome back to another Random Wednesday episode. Now, since we're talking about VGA, a term like VGA is actually a computer display standard. You'll be surprised to know that the definition actually contains a lot of things. Things like resolution, color depth, color palette, pixel aspect ratio, and even some things about the hardware, like the connectors used, as well as what kind of capabilities the video card actually has. And what we're gonna do today is we're gonna be looking at several of the most iconic display standards, and we're gonna be talking about just a few interesting things about each. To be honest, the whole purpose of this episode is just for nostalgia, but of course we're gonna be just taking the time to marvel a little bit at how far technology has come. Incidentally, we will only be focusing on the standards created by IBM. Many other standards exist, especially in this day and age where we have, monitors of all sorts of sizes. So we're just going to be focusing on a very small subset. If you'd like to find out more, I will include some Wikipedia links in the video description, and you can take a look at a full list. Anyway, with that said, let us jump right into our first display standard. First and foremost is MDA. Released in 1981, it stands for the Monochrome Display Adapter. This is one of the simplest display standards out there. It provides just a text mode. Now, back in the day, what text mode means is that you cannot actually color all the individual pixels on your screen. In other words, it is actually not pixel addressable. Instead, drawing to the screen only entails saying what characters appear at what positions. Text usually comes from a character set. For example, in MDA, it uses what is known as code page 437. These glyphs might be familiar to you, especially if, you've been working with computers back then. Interestingly, a lot of the shapes that are present here are actually used in ASCII art to draw out GUI. As you can imagine, GUI isn't really possible in those days, but by creatively placing elements around the screen, we can sort of emulate that look. MDA text mode is 80 columns by 25 rows, and in terms of color, well, it's monochrome, as its name implies. What that means, of course, is that every pixel on screen is just one bit, on or off, and that is what leads to that iconic look, where we have green text on a black background, and that actually sort of represents the retro computers of that age. Moving on, let us talk about CGA, which has also come out in 1981. In fact, it came out a little before MDA, and the reason why I'm doing these two out of order is because, well, CGA kinda does a little bit more, and I thought we could, sort of pick up from what we've learned about MDA. Anyway, CGA stands for the Color Graphics Adapter, and is in fact the more powerful of the two. This graphics adapter provides several different resolutions and color depths, and includes graphics modes. In other words, it is actually pixel addressable. The more interesting of the modes is probably the 320 by 200 mode, which actually gives you 2 bits per pixel. What that means is every pixel can be one of 4 colors. If you played games from that era, you might recognize this particular palette: cyan, magenta, black, and white. Quite a few games have been written using just these 4 colors. Another graphics mode available is 640 by 200 at 1 bit per pixel. Now, as you can imagine, with this sort of dimensions, it's pretty weird. Normally, we'll stretch things out to the 4:3 aspect ratio of monitors of that time. And what this means is the pixels on screen are more than twice as tall as they are wide. In this 1 bit per pixel mode, Well, what you can do is you can actually choose any color for use as the foreground color. Now, I say any color, but really I mean any color within the CGA palette. This is the entire CGA palette, 16 colors. If you're using the 640 by 200 mode, your foreground color can be any one of these. For both of these graphics modes, there are also accompanying text modes with the same limitations in terms of color. Interestingly, there is another graphics mode. It is 160 by 100 and actually gives you access to all the colors provided by the CGA palette. This is actually an exploit of the text mode. Every pixel on screen is actually a character that is truncated vertically. To fill up a pixel on screen, you just need to draw a bar character, and by quickly switching between the different foreground colors, you can actually paint a full picture. This is just one of many tricks available from that particular era. CGA is a color adapter that really had its fair share of different tricks to either produce more colors or produce more resolution. Let's move on now to EGA. Released in 1984, EGA stands for the Enhanced Graphics Adapter. In terms of screen dimensions, well, it's not very different from CGA. What's really changed this time, however, is access to different colors. You can now use 16 colors for almost all the different dimensions. What this means is you can have access to what is equivalent to the entire CGA palette at once. You can also make your own palette. EGA supports 64 different colors, and you can pick and choose any 16 for use at a single time. So one interesting thing to mention at this point is that all the adapters we've seen so far actually use the same connector. Despite the fact that EGA carries much more information than, say, MDA, these same connectors sufficed for that purpose. However, we're going to move on to VGA next, and you'll see that that's no longer the case. VGA, which stands for Video Graphics Array, was released in 1987, and one of the big changes it brought along is in fact an additional row of pins to the display connector. The original plug is known as the DE9, in other words, well, it is D-shaped and has 9 pins, whereas starting VGA, we now need to have a DE15 connector, in other words, a D-shaped connector with 15 pins. In terms of its functionality, VGA introduces the iconic 640 by 480 resolution, which we still occasionally use today. But at this resolution, VGA only supports 16 colors. That is no improvement from EGA. Speaking of EGA, you can also run a VGA device at 640 by 350 pixels, which follows EGA's resolution. However, what's even more interesting for a VGA card is the fact that if you run at 320 by 200, you can now access 255 colors per pixel. In other words, you now have 8-bit per pixel color. While these are what I would consider the official dimensions, the VGA card is actually quite versatile and allows you to choose from many different display dimensions, up to as much as 800 by 600. Let's move on once again to our next display adapter, and that is XGA. XGA stands for the Extended Graphics Array and was released in 1990. XGA introduces the 1024 by 768 resolution, and at that resolution it is able to support 8 bits per pixel, or 255 colors per pixel. However, if you were to shrink down your dimensions to 640 by 480, in other words VGA resolution, you can now support 16 bits per pixel, in other words 65,536 colors per pixel. I'll consider this basically sufficient to have photorealistic images without having to, go through a lot of effort to make it look okay. So yeah, you can see how far things have progressed in just that one decade. XGA hardware also now supports hardware acceleration. What this means is an XGA device is now capable of performing things like drawing and filling. So you can actually draw shapes, fill them, color them, very much like what a graphics card does today, except with 3D graphics. And there you have it. We've just basically had a very quick rundown of certain IBM display standards. Like I said, today with all the different screen resolutions, well, many different display standards are now available out there, so it would definitely be impossible to cover them all. We've only been looking at the IBM released ones with, some amount of historical interest, but I think that's enough to show us how far things have come. GPUs today are capable of so much more, but it's interesting to look back, back in the 80s to see how things have progressed. Anyway, that is basically all there is for this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you gained some insights. But yeah, that's it. Until next time, you're watching 0612 TV. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked this video, consider checking out the rest of my work on my channel. Alternatively, you may be interested in a playlist of my earlier work on computing and computer science topics. If you'd like to show me some monetary support, I am on Patreon. You can find a link to my campaign in the video description. Of course, you can simply like this video or leave a comment. I'll be sure to respond as soon as I can. To keep in touch with my future uploads, do subscribe to this channel. And for even more updates, check out the official Twitter account for this channel at 0612TV. Thank you for your support.